So welcome to our 12th episode of Housing Matters. It's a podcast about all things related to housing and real estate. The show delves into the ins and outs of the real estate market, from home buying to investment strategies, while advocating for affordable housing initiatives. Each episode features interviews with professionals from the world of real estate, development, and finance, offering listeners valuable insights and practical tips to help them succeed in today's market. Whether you're a first-time homebuyer, a seasoned investor, or someone interested in the future of housing, Housing Matters has something for you. And today, I'm thrilled to have joining us Kevin Bunker. Kevin and I have known each other for a number of years now. I think, Kevin, I actually met you back in my Hammond Lumber days when I was still wrapping up at the University of Maine at Augusta.
Yeah.
And I think we went in and had a meeting with them about student housing, which still hasn't happened in Augusta.
I think you were 23 maybe then.
Yeah.
You were young. Yeah.
So I've always really looked up to Kevin. Kevin is the founding principal of Developers Collaborative, which he founded in 2007 after graduating from Harvard's Graduate School of Design with a master in urban planning. He's a former municipal planner and a lobsterman, which I want to talk with you a little bit about that today. And he's the principal on all of DC's current projects, which have averaged about $45 million per year in recent years and run the gamut from residential to commercial. Kevin brings experience in complex financing models, including tax increment financing, the use of credits, and other public-private partnerships, which all lead to creative projects that build community and strengthen the Maine economy in innovative ways. Kevin also is an activist, helping to advance initiatives that focus on smart growth and downtowns across the state and local levels. And he was a recipient of Portland's prestigious Economic Development Achievement Award in 2019, and now is a resident of Portland, right?
That's right.
No longer Brunswick.
No, moved out in July.
So, Kevin, why don't we get started a little bit going back to the beginning, 2007. You didn't grow up as a developer, right? This isn't.
No.
Can you tell us a little bit about kind of your background and how you got into development?
I think, like a lot of people, I got into development through sort of a backdoor related industry. Like you said, I studied urban planning. And I got into urban planning because I had taken a course in undergrad to fill out a geography minor, and it was a course in city planning. And as a international affairs major, I'd studied a lot of economics and law and history and politics, and I thought all those things were super interesting. But when I took this planning course, what really drove home for me was that's where all those things come together. How we arrange ourselves on the face of the earth within cities and outside cities has a lot more to do with how we end up as a society maybe than who the president is even. And so it kind of tickled all my intellectual fancies in one discipline. And I thought, if I ever go back and study more, I want to look at this planning thing. And so when I decided to try to get off the boat and do something else with my life, planning was the first thing I looked at. Started at USM, ended up at Harvard, and partway through Harvard, I was sitting in a course the first day, like the audit day of a course at Harvard on real estate finance. And this is the Harvard Design School. It's the #1 architecture school and the #1 landscape architecture school. It's like the #6 planning school. So the planning program was always sort of the redheaded stepchild of the Harvard Design School, because it didn't quite belong at the Kennedy School of Government, didn't quite belong at the design school. But they had a finance course there, and it was basically for design professionals. So I was a planner sitting in listening, and the guy says, you designers, you architects, you think you determine what happens in the built environment, you make all the decisions, because Harvard's very top-down, we're the experts, we're the professionals, we're going to teach the masses how to do design, and the planning school sort of had that feeling about it, as opposed to USM, which is very bottom-up. And they said, he said, you might make 5% of the decisions about the built environment, and you could see everybody kind of pull back a little bit. He said, the rest of the decisions are made by private capital. And if you want to know how that works, that's why you should take my class. And having been an economics minor and been good with numbers and thought about that, it hit me like a ton of bricks that there's this financial aspect to planning and it's this thing called real estate. Now, most people, as you know, from the business you're in, when they say real estate, they think about buying and selling houses. And the other world you're in, though, you also know that there's a lot more to real estate than that. And that sort of opened my eyes to it. And it kind of went from there. I met a developer named Richard Berman halfway through grad school. He said, "What do you want to do when you graduate?" I said, "I want to go work for state planning office." This was before Paul LePage had eliminated it.
Yeah.
And he said, "You don't want to do that. They don't make any money, and you don't get to see the impact of what you did. You want to be a developer." And I said, "I do." He said, "Yeah, you're going to come work with me." And we went from there and founded Developers Collaborative.
And that's interesting that you mentioned that, because that's not really a course in college or something you would talk to a high school student and say, "What do you want to do when you grow up?" "Oh, I want to be a mechanic. I want to be an astronaut. I want to be a physicist," whatever. No one ever says, "I want to be a developer."
Ever.
Yet that is what shapes the world in which we live in.
Yeah.
Interesting. So you had this kind of vision, hey, I'm going to go learn planning, learn the discipline of planning, and then apply that in kind of a governmental kind of a role. But
Yeah.
your path crossed somebody that encouraged you to take more of an entrepreneurial focus.
Yeah, well, it's like life. You know, you show up and you do the next right thing and you try to make good decisions. It's like, you know, National Treasure, you know, the movie National Treasure?
Yeah.
Where he says, you know, Thomas Edison learned 2,000 ways how not to make a light bulb. You know, you learn something very valuable if you're always putting yourself out there and trying to follow the breadcrumbs. You end up where you're supposed to be.
Yeah.
And usually that path, you know, however you believe that's supposed to happen, spiritual or otherwise, you end up in a better place than anything you could have imagined for yourself. Because we never know what's best for us.
Yeah.
You know, some people do. I didn't. You know, but we end up there.
Well, it's interesting because you grew up on, well, correct me if I'm wrong, on the coast, right? And then and you grew up in a family that was lobstering, or how did that happen in your life?
My dad lobstered till I was about 4, and then he left the boat. So it was kind of in our family. My grandfather had been a harbor master down east for many decades. My brother was a stern man. And so when you come back to Maine and you kind of don't have anything else going on, and you're in the mid-coast, the best jobs were to hop on a boat because it paid well.
Yeah.
And so when I hadn't done much of my degree after I graduated, and I met a girl and came back to Maine and had to sort of start over, jumping on a boat was the best decision.
Yeah, earn some cash quick, and but then you knew this isn't where I want to be doing this for like the next.
Yeah, I liked it. It was great. Being up with the dawn and coming in at dark, and the feeling of hauling all those traps and, you know, being out there was powerful. I mean, I didn't have my own boat. I was just a stern man. But at the same time, the thing about, like a lot of professions, you know, you show up and you do what you're told and you do a good job and you end up in the top quartile of the profession. You know, that's kind of how it was with stern men, because I showed up every day. But it wasn't in my blood.
Yeah.
One of my real good friends is a lobsterman, and it's in his blood, and it wasn't in mine. I want to do, you know.
Yeah. So tell me a little bit about the early days. You crossed paths with Richard, and you started working on projects. What were some of your first projects that you remember?
First few mostly were affordable housing. Richard had done a lot of LIHTC deals, and he had sort of decided to stop doing them. He had a partner named Jim Hatch who he had done them with. Richard was sort of the money and some of the knowledge, and Jim was more the hands-on, boots-on-the-ground guy doing the projects. And so Richard's idea for me was, well, let's maybe restart that division. Maybe this kid could inject some life into it. So I had learned GIS, Geographic Information Systems, in college. And so what I did was I took the QAP, the Qualified Allocation Plan from Misha, and all the other programs I could find, AHP, CDBG, anything that had a spatial component to it, and I put it in a GIS model and made a chloropleth map to tell me where to target to look for sites.
Interesting.
And it told me to go to Lewiston and to Waterville.
Yeah.
And I found 3 deals in my first month, and we built them all.
Wow.
It took 3 or 4 years.
Was there less competition then for the resources than there is now? Or?
No, it was less. It wasn't quite as professionalized as it is now, like all professions. You know, it's people stand on the shoulders of others and advance the. It's like the LeBron versus Jordan debate.
Sure, yeah.
You know.
Now Cooper Flagg's going to wipe them all out.
Maybe, yeah, I hope so. But it was there was still a lot of competition for the resource. But what I identified was that I couldn't jump into Portland and be a player. Nobody knew who I was.
Yeah.
But I could take this sort of burgeoning skill set that I was developing and take it to the secondary cities of Maine. And it played really, really well because I was bringing a professionalism and a desire and an ethic that maybe wasn't there as much. And so I was successful early in those counties and those towns, and then became a thing in Portland. It took a few years.
So working kind of from the outside in and focusing on the actual allocation plan that the state has that says these are going to score well. And instead of picking a site and then hoping that it would score well to be able to get the resources, you backed into it by saying this site's going to score well because this is their points metric. And
our goal was to score first every year. And we didn't score first every year, but early in my career, we tried to have one a year and score right at the top. The other thing that happened when I started the company, as you know, 2008 happened.
Yeah.
So it was a massive recession.
I was going to ask about that. Like, this wasn't the best of times to be doing what you were doing.
No, but it's a good time to start a development company because you're not going to lose anything because you don't have anything. So I didn't have any fear I was going to lose anything.
Yeah.
You know? But the state historic tax credit was passed in 2008 as well. And between the LIHTC and the historic credits, as you know, the twinning those is very powerful, as you've seen. And that was kind of the only game in town. So there was no market rate development. All the condo deals that were going to get built all stopped in Portland, and nobody was doing anything. But if I had a LIHTC deal in hand, I was going to get really good pricing from my contractor. And, you know, it was some of the only deals that were getting done those years. So it was kind of in the right place at the right time.
And for people listening, LIHTC, low-income housing tax credit, those are the mechanisms that is primarily used to create housing where people's, what they can afford to pay for rent doesn't equal to what it actually costs to build the thing, essentially.
Yeah.
Right. And you've done how many units this way now? Oh, it must be over 1,000.
Pushing 1,000.
Yeah.
Yeah, somewhere around there.
Yeah. And the way essentially the capital stack in those works, like your professor said, it follows the money. The state puts out an RFP through Maine State Housing and says, hey, developers, give us your plans. A number of people compete on this, which you've been doing for a long time. And then the resources get essentially allocated based on the projects with the highest scoring.
Yep.
And you've really cut out a niche in doing this very effectively and have built a huge, I think, group of people who now turn to you who are maybe not even part of your organization directly, but look to Developers Collaborative to help consult with and work with getting their projects approved too, not just your own, right?
Yeah, it's never our first choice to consult because we always want to own when it's done. But we never let that stop us from doing a deal because the fact that our skill set is so specialized, it's kind of a niche market. There are groups that want the housing and need the housing and should be able to do the housing that don't have the skill set in place. And so it makes sense for us to consult in those times.
Is that why, or who came up with the name Developers Collaborative?
Richard did.
Okay.
Yeah.
And was it the idea to be able to work with other developers too, or is it just kind of evolved into that?
At the time, Developers Collaborative 1.0, the idea was was independent developers get together, share office space, form this loose sort of cadre of professionals that would form together around individual projects according to time, talent, and treasure. You know, who had the money, who had the time, who had the skill.
Yeah.
So he had a number of sort of junior partners around him, a guy named Dirk and Jim, and Peter Bass was with us for a little while. And the idea was we would all be in this developer clubhouse, and we all believed in smart growth. Well, Dirk didn't, but the rest of us did. And the idea is we would all do these deals together.
Yeah.
And that sort of utopian vision, like a lot of utopian visions, didn't really connect because those guys turned out Peter really needed and wanted to work on his own. Jim really wanted to do affordable housing, and he kind of wanted Richard to be involved. And Dirk just wanted to do commercial buildings with Richard. So this collaboration never really developed, but what it turned into is Richard and me working together turned into a monster. You know, we hit it off. We were very simpatico. We loved working together, and we were going to go out and, you know, take over the world. I mean, he already kind of had, he had achieved a lot of success, but so then the other parts just sort of fell away over time, and it was just me and Richard.
Yeah.
And then when Richard retired in 2011, he never had employees. And I said, why am I doing all the scanning? You know, why am I doing the, you know, if I hire someone, as you built the company as well, that first person you hire that takes away 40 hours a week of work that frees you up to make more money.
Yeah.
And that's, I hired Laura, you know.
Yeah. And now you have how many people working there?
I think it's 33.
Yeah.
Somewhere around there.
Yeah, that's awesome.
Yeah.
So this whole idea of creating nirvana utopia for developers didn't take off yet. Ironically, you've now fast forward, almost 20 years, have created an organization that does a tremendous amount of your own projects, yet collaborates in many ways with other developers. It's kind of ironic that.
Yeah, we don't do a ton of other collaboration. We've got some partners. We have a little bit of that, but primarily the DNA of Developers Collaborative is we're developing our own projects.
Yeah.
We just never let that define us because there's opportunity and frankly, there's need. There's, when you have a skill set and when you're placed in a position to have a platform, yes, you built the platform, and yes, you're supposed to use the platform to do well for yourself, but you're also supposed to use that platform to do things that for others that won't get done if you don't do them.
Yeah.
So it's a mix.
Well, I think it's interesting that you have that worldview, though, because there are other people that are developers that don't have that worldview.
It's probably most of them, right? I mean, I don't know. What do you think the percentage is?
I would say probably like 85% don't.
Maybe
it's like,
75, 85%.
It's like, what is the quickest way to make $1 on this deal and on to the next? And while you have a very profitable company and it's not charity work, but you're not going into this with how am I going to make the most on this particular project. It's like, how am I going to get the project done? Are the financials going to work? Are we going to make a reasonable profit and then move on to the next one? Because with a lot of these deals, right, the way they're structured is there isn't as long-term equity perhaps in the project like you might have if you're developing, a 300-unit apartment complex for $65 million, and you go out and you get your financing together and you build it, and someday that place is worth $80 million, and
Yeah.
That's not the way your deals work. I mean, you make a majority
Some of them.
right? I mean,
those numbers aren't quite so big, but yeah.
Yeah, I mean, right. So you guys, you're doing a lot of this kind of yeoman's work, really. I mean, it's competitive arena to be in. As a developer, you're both a steward of what the public needs, yet they're meeting their ire of not doing it the way that they want, and trying to navigate this challenge of, wait, you're telling me that we need housing, yet every time we make a proposal or bring something forward, it's like fighting tooth and nail to maybe get it done.
Yeah.
And it just seems like you're trying to be both the organization that's helping solve the problem, yet at the same time being viewed by the public as the organization that's creating not your organization, but as a developer.
Yeah.
I mean, can you unpack that a little bit? I mean, how do you navigate this world that we live in where, you have what everyone says we need, housing, and the ability to create it, yet an environment that seems totally at odds with that?
Well, there's a lot in what you said, and before I get to that, it's not quite the 80-20 rule where 20% of the people do 80% of the work. That rule in life. It's with us. It's like probably 2/3 of the work we do relates to affordable housing. Over half of the production, and we're at 60 to 80 million a year now, just from 45. But at least 2/3 of the profit is in market rate stuff that maybe you've never even hear about. Like that's where the money is. The affordable housing is a very good stable base.
Yeah.
To cover the bills, and it's reliable. But the wealth from the PFS is not in the affordable housing at all. So what affordable housing does is gives me a base to go out and take big swings at other stuff and try to hit a home run here and there. But your question about the attitudes toward housing, yeah, it's interesting because developers are an easy mark for criticism. I mean, most of us are white, most of us are males, and it's like we have a good gig, in America. Yeah, and it's funny though that housing is a societal problem. To me, the problem with housing, there is an inflationary aspect to housing where it keeps going up and up, and it's not linked to incomes necessarily. But even if it was linked directly with incomes, there's still, if you look at the demographic pyramid of America, where it was this sort of, you can't see this on the radio, but there's a right triangle where there was a middle class. And now we don't have a middle class. We've got a very few people at the top, and we've got a ton of people at the bottom. It's this curved thing. Our housing market, even if it was linked with incomes, it wouldn't look like that. There wouldn't be any housing for all these people at the bottom. So it's society's problem. Income inequality is really the problem, but developers are supposed to fix it. You know, where we have inclusionary zoning because we're supposed to fix this problem. It's like, well, you know, maybe society ought to have people who, maybe you ought to have a middle class. You know, maybe there'd be more middle class housing options if you had a middle class.
Right.
But that doesn't excuse us because there is this thing where real estate is very capital intensive, and people with a lot of capital tend to collect real estate, which excludes others from having it. And that's, I think, a problem that is real and developers ought to try to solve. So that maybe didn't quite answer your question.
No, I mean, it does, because it seems like you could focus all of your time and effort on market rate projects. You have a ton of connections. Your skill set opens doors to do that, yet you still continue to use your experience in organization to help with the individuals who cannot afford that amount, no matter what they would do. And I talk about this with some other people. You know, we're trying to create housing for people that are working at the jobs that are in the area, which largely are service sector related jobs that don't have higher wages that pay for what it costs to build a lot of stuff. And so that's where, you know, when I was serving in the legislature and we invested over $250 million in housing in 4 years, and you guys did a great job adding a lot of units with those resources, we recognized that Maine's area median income, you know, our average income, is not in line with what it costs us to actually produce in Maine. And you see other parts of the country, maybe more robust construction occurring for a couple of different reasons, wages being higher and also access to less expensive labor in some of those markets. I mean, you must run into challenges here developing in Maine. It's not the easiest place in the United States to develop. Why here and not somewhere else?
Well, I was born here when I had my, you know, I already had my daughter when I went to Harvard. So by the time I got exposed to the larger world and realized I could probably have a career anywhere because I was succeeding there, I had already decided that my future was going to be in Maine because I wasn't with the mother of my daughter anymore. We were co-parenting. We each had joint custody. And if I was going to be a big part of my daughter's life, I was going to need to be in Maine. So I never thought about going anywhere else. And started Developers Collaborative, and you know, you kind of grow where you're planted. And it became successful, and so it never made any sense to go anywhere else. I mean, if you go out and try to conquer the world, you think you conquer it, and then you realize you just jump into the next pond and you're just a small fish again. So you might as well just get happy in the pond you're in, you know?
Yeah, someone was saying recently, I was listening, they were like, you know, someday if we're lucky to make it to this age, our 90-year-old self is going to look back and be like, remember the good old days, you know? Those are those days that we're living right now. Like,
Yeah.
this is life. We're making it.
I was talking to Richard. I actually spent the weekend with him at his house up in Jackson, and I had put skis on for the first time in my life. We went skiing together,
Nice.
Nordic skiing, and we were talking about this thing about and this is about parenting, where it's paradoxical because we talk, you know, he has adult children, and we were talking about that and talking about my kids, and there's this. Richard and I were both, you know, not that we're self-made men, but we both grew up without anything, and then now we have stuff. And we had a lot of help on the way, but that was so foundational to our character and personality. That struggle meant so much to us, but that very same drive to succeed, one of the driving forces behind it was so my kids can have it better than I do. So we actually eliminate that our kids have that same opportunity that we had by virtue of the success. And it's like, how do you deal with that? And at the end, what I've come to is you just got to let it go, because you can't, you know, I'm not going to do this artificial thing where I, you know, force my daughter to pick up cigarette butts at my properties for 10 years. Or, you know, it just doesn't it doesn't feel real to me. So how do you deal with that? And to me, it's just like, well, you can't, just like high school heroes that try to put their athletics on their kids and try to live through their kids at athletics. I can't live through I can't say that my foundational experiences should be my kids' foundational experience. They get to have their own. And I got to be okay with that. And my youngest daughter particularly, she's never known anything but a wonderful, successful existence. And my oldest daughter kind of watched it happen and has benefited from it. But
now she's involved in the company, is that right?
she's interned with us for a couple of years.
Yeah.
She's graduating with a business degree here in May, and she's deciding whether to come to Portland, but she's really leaning toward trying to do something in the Boston area, which I think is good. I think it's healthy. She can always come back to Portland.
Sure.
But I think for her to go down there and get scrappy and try to figure it out without Dad is super good.
Yeah, awesome. Go through that struggle a little bit.
Yeah.
So you're known for taking on a lot of community first kind of projects and getting involved and talking with neighbors and stakeholders. Can you talk a little bit about why that's important to you? And I want to maybe do that through the lens of one project that really has stood out to me, which is Freedom Place in Portland.
Yep.
I think there's a pretty powerful story behind that for you, and also what you think that represents to the community with that facility.
Yeah, that isn't the best example of reaching out to neighbors because the history of that site was that there was a drop-in day program there before we bought it. Catholic Charities owned the building. They were renting it out as a day program to Amistad. And so there was a lot of neighborhood impacts from that drop-in homeless day program happening there. And we bought the thing because somebody was going to buy it, and we assumed those programs would move. And we didn't want to be the ones to put that use out of business because it was a use that needed to be somewhere. But we knew that we would give them a better runway than anyone else would. And so we bought it, and then in the course of getting to know Amistad and talking to them, we kind of said, maybe we won't do a condo project here. Maybe is there anything we can do that, we could do a reuse here that would allow us to redevelop the building? And we came up with this idea of a women's sober house. And from a neighborhood perspective, from just an impact without having value judgments about whether or not what was happening on site was a good use for society, just as a neighbor, anything would have been less impact than that. So we never really had any pushback about our plans there, like we have at some of the other, like the Homeless Services Center or some of the other affordable housing deals that we've done. But in terms of putting that deal together, there was a big conversation at that time in the city about how to do that. We hadn't done the Homeless Services Center yet, so there was no sort of one place to go, and different groups were trying to figure it out different ways. Avesta was working on something, and I think Chom was working on something, and we said, we're going to figure it out without Maine Housing, without TAC, without LIHTC. We're going to just do it with historics and some other subsidies that we figured out. We got the condo developer down the street to buy our inclusionary units for his project, so that helped the capital stack. And then
where do you come up with this stuff? Just like pops in your brain?
I just really like financial engineering. I think Richard said to me, and it always rang true for me, the most creative aspect of real estate development is not, the architect thinks they're the creator, the creative professional, and but the legal agreements and numbers are infinitely to me more creative. That's my canvas. I want to. For me, it's super rewarding to figure out how I can layer 4 different types of capital, like historic credits and LIHTC credits and different things that all have different requirements, make them all talk to each other, and then create a legal structure that allows them to all flow.
Yeah.
And that's just super fun, And when you get to pull it off, it's like chef's kiss, It's like, look at this,
People are like, when I think of fun, I think of like going skiing or going to the beach, and Kevin's like working on a spreadsheet and sifting through legal docs.
That's also fun. I don't get into spreadsheets much anymore because Laura's my guru now for the most part on some of that stuff. But just conceptualizing the out-of-the-box stuff, like I don't do much with LIHTC anymore at all. Laura runs that whole shop. She was my first employee, and I was kind of her mentor. She was my protege, and she's taken that, at least as far as I took it. So I get to come on the podcast, but
she's doing the spreadsheets.
She's doing everything.
Yeah.
I did Hodgkin's. She was around for it, but I haven't done any heavy lifting on a LIHTC project for at least 5 years.
Wow.
You know.
Yeah, she's doing great things. Yeah, that's awesome. So back to Freedom Place, how did that come to be? I mean, obviously you were going to do something with it. It was available, but why a sober house?
Well, it was really that relationship with Amistad, talking to Brian Townsend and Meredith, who's the deputy director over there, about what could we do in the building that's a different use. And it was sort of coming conceptually where, okay, I'm a real estate developer, I'm a capitalist, I have to put this building into productive use because I just paid for it. You're a nonprofit, you're a service provider, you're out in the community doing things. Can we fit those things together and make a partnership? And it was exploring all the different ideas. We looked at a bunch of different things, and finally we decided that a women's sober house could work because there was a big need in the community. We thought we could get some project-based vouchers for it from Maine Housing, which we ended up getting. And the big thing with doing homelessness or sober houses or any of that kind of housing, as you know from the Housing First model that's being talked about now, it's not so much getting the units built, but the services that have to come with it. Where are the service dollars? So we tried to make this blend of the vouchers would provide the rent for the women, and then Amistad already had some of the service dollars. And it was a groundbreaking model. No one's really done it before. We kind of know now why no one's done it, because I've lost money on it every year.
Really?
That's the hidden story with Freedom Place, is it's financially it's a loser. But I think it's helped some people.
Yeah.
And we're trying to dial in the model. It didn't quite like DC, it didn't quite turn into that utopian vision that we wanted, but it's been better than not. That it's existed.
It's making progress, and you're learning from it in ways that you can maybe replicate that, or others could replicate that elsewhere. And is it possible to break even? Because it's a population that needs to be helped.
I think we've been breaking even the past few months. I think that the model was so difficult and challenging that it needed to be very tightly managed, and there was a period where they didn't manage it as tightly as they should, and I didn't manage it as tightly as I should. It was sort of a distributed decision-making model where they ran the project on site and I ran sort of the building and the financials. And for a while there, neither one of us did a particularly great job. And we're paying a lot more attention to it now and sort of dialing it in, and it's getting better.
That's good.
Yeah.
It's tough because it's hard to get people to come to the table just to build these places, but even harder after they're built to keep them running. They saw this in Utah. They built a ton of facilities, but without having the intensive hands-on approach to help people, they were struggling. But I appreciate that you did that project, and I think that it also is something that a lot of folks could look to and say, hey, look, we need to be making investments and helping people get better, because if someone's living under a bridge or is struggling with addiction issues, they're not likely to get themselves onto a pathway of prosperity,
Yeah, and I think trying to meld that with a capitalist model is positive, because it's also unrealistic, and you haven't been in government for so long, you know that it's not realistic to just ask the government to pay for everything all the time forever.
Right.
It just isn't, what was it, Margaret Thatcher that said the problem with socialism is sooner or later you run out of other people's money?
Yeah.
Not that that's socialist or bad, or it's not good things that we shouldn't fund, but it's just not realistic to think that government is always going to be the answer. And to the extent that we can sometimes be the answer without taking too much subsidy, that's going to be better for everybody.
Yeah. It's kind of an interesting thing that you mentioned, because I've spent the last decade plus of my life working on public policy, but at the end of the day feeling like, much like what Richard said to you, it's interesting you brought that up. You can go and work in the ivory tower, if you will, right? But at the end of the day, is that actually going to move the needle? No. Yes, it's part of the equation. Yeah. There has to be good public policy that supports this initiatives, but at the end of the day, the projects have to get done.
Yeah.
The roofs have to get built, or else nobody has one to stay under.
Yeah.
And it's going to take a lot of people rowing in the same direction to make that happen. I mean, Maine needs some, depending on where you look, anywhere from 40 to 80,000. Let's just call it even half that, 20,000.
Yeah.
The capacity is limited to do that production in this state, and the logistical challenges associated with it are many. But unless we're moving in that direction to create units, the policy is not going to do anything, you know?
Yeah, we can't sit around and talk about it.
Right. But so you've been involved in a lot of different things, public-private partnerships, but you have kind of this philosophy, right, about smart growth. And can you talk a little bit about that and why you're passionate about it?
That comes from being a planner. And when I started getting into planning in the late 90s, smart growth was the buzzword. I was involved in Grow Smart Maine for a while, and there was one point there was this debate if we should still call it smart growth or we should call it something else, and people want to call it sustainability and different things, and I'm like, smart growth's always been good enough for me. But smart growth, simply put, is build stuff where the other stuff is. If you have existing infrastructure and you put a building on that, that's going to be cheaper than putting a building out where there isn't any existing infrastructure. And people are not going to have to drive as far. And it's just common sense, really, land use patterns, getting back to our traditional land use patterns when it wasn't possible to, travel 200 miles back and forth to work every day or jump in the car and take a trip to the supermarket. You had to locate yourself in a place that made sense because you didn't have enough resources to not do that. And we're coming up against this idea that just because we think in America we have infinite resources and can do whatever we want all the time, that's probably not sustainable. So let's look back to those old traditional development patterns and put stuff where other stuff is and save ourselves a lot of grief in the future.
Yeah, and the majority of your projects are in service centers, right, or built out communities?
Just about all of them, yeah.
You're not building somewhere in a random field off in the middle of nowhere.
Yeah, we cut down one piece of woods in Yarmouth. It still kind of bothers me, but it was, there was in town Yarmouth,
Yeah.
So, but we did cut down more trees than I would have liked.
Yeah, I was actually just in Yarmouth yesterday, and I was kind of surprised. My perception is always driving by that it's going to be more built out, but there's still quite a bit of undeveloped space down there.
Well, those Yarmouths and Cumberlands and Falmouths and Capes, they only want a certain amount of things,
Right, I know. It's kind of an interesting thing, right? Maybe you can speak to this a little bit. To me, there seems to be a little bit of hypocrisy as it relates to creating housing, because you have these communities that are like, hey, we want more housing, we need more housing, we've got to do this. And then you're like, okay, I've got this beautiful building and 4-unit, I'm going to put it next door. And they're like, whoa, not there.
Yeah, no, I mean, you nailed it. I mean, it's, and I don't really try to crucify people for saying that because, as a market rate guy, I believe, in rational self-interest, and you're supposed to act. The idea is if we all act in our own self-interest, the invisible hand kind of guides us to where we should be, and those people are acting in their self-interest. But sometimes you got to come in and overcome that by hook or by crook,
Shake it up a little bit.
Sometimes you gotta compromise, sometimes you gotta cajole, sometimes you gotta convince, and sometimes you gotta vanquish,
Have you ever really had your sights set on a project and no matter what you did, it just wasn't going to happen? Just
a few. Yeah, not very often, but there's been a few. When I started Developers Collaborative, Richard had already been involved in redeveloping the Maine State Prison site in Thomaston, and that never went anywhere. Probably wasn't the right idea for the time, but I've gotten involved in only one I can think of right now is a deal in Auburn we tried to do, and it was in a sort of a rural part of Auburn, and the community just came out against us big time and ran us out of town pretty quickly. And but we came back and did a very successful LIHTC deal in Auburn that had a ton of support. It was just the wrong neighborhood, you know. But generally speaking, we have very few times that's happened to us.
So you don't take the view some developers do where, hey, I went there, they burned me, I'm done, like X them off the list. You just look for a different way to do it.
No, unless I feel like there's been a municipal official or a regime in place that I felt was dishonorable and they're still there.
Yeah.
And it's not someone I can work with and trust.
Yeah.
Which, is fairly rare.
Yeah. In Maine especially, it seems like we have a good culture here.
It's good people, yeah.
And it's a small group, right? Like, when you go to Maine Real Estate Development Association events or whatever, it's the same people, over and over.
Yep.
A lot of the same crowd. Well, I think that this has been a really interesting conversation so far, but one of the things that I want to talk a little bit about, not related to business, but you're a pretty big baseball fan, right?
I am, yeah.
Can you? I'm interested in learning a little bit more about this. My understanding is you've been to an Orioles game at every stadium.
No, I have eight more to go. I got 2 scheduled for April. I'm going to do Kansas City and Arizona in April, and I'm scheduled to be in Atlanta on the 4th of July as well.
Oh, really?
But I've got 8 left. Yeah.
And do you round them out this year, you think?
I don't think I'll get them all this year. If I get half of them, that'll be good. But most of the ones I have left, there's one shot in a year to do it, and it's not always convenient.
How did you, Orioles fan, right?
Orioles fan,
How did this happen?
I was
Growing up in
9,
Maine.
and I started watching baseball. And I'm a contrarian, so I was never going to root for the home team.
I got it.
I won't, so I had to find a different team. And I remember watching the 1982 season, and Cal Ripken was a rookie. He ended up winning Rookie of the Year that year. And they came down to the last day of the season, and they were playing the Milwaukee Brewers for the AL East. That was back when the Brewers were in the AL East for the AL title. And they lost 10-1 on the last day of the season. And I remember Cal Ripken at third base sitting on the ground crying. And I was like, oh, I wanted him to win because he was the Rookie of the Year, and he was young, and I was young. And then the next year, 1983, Cal Ripken took over the baseball world, won the MVP, and the Orioles won the World Series. And I'm like, that's my guy. That's my team forever. I didn't know at that time what it would mean to have to go to Baltimore as an adult so many times. I didn't know they were going to get Camden Yards, which was awesome. But I also didn't know that they, haven't yet been back to the World Series.
Yeah.
But I'm loyal to a fault, and I will stand by. I don't have the ability to change teams, and I just don't. I don't have it in me. And I love baseball. So that's it.
That's it. You're stuck to the Orioles.
Yep.
And running, right?
I like to run. Yep.
What's going on that front?
I run half marathons. That's kind of my distance because I'm not a sprinter. But I don't have a lot of running talent. Like, I'm not built for it. I don't have this wiry frame. I'm more like maybe a skinny Clydesdale,
Skinny Clydesdale.
But half marathon's a good distance for me because I can have pretty good endurance, and I'm faster than all the slow people, and I'm slower than the fast people. So I'm usually every race I'm run, I finish like in the top 20% or so. Mm-hmm. And I run a half marathon in every state, which is maybe what you're referring to. I finished that in July. It was just a goal I had to see the country. And
what was the most beautiful one that you did?
Most beautiful. There's been a few. My favorite one was Kentucky. I did the one called Run the Bluegrass. It was running through the horse farms, the thoroughbred horse farms and this rolling hills, and it was in the spring. And my one memory that I remember the most was running through these hills, and how when you go and walking down the street and there's a dog behind a fence and the dog wants to be part of what you're doing and the dog gets excited. The horses do that. The horses see all the people running and they start running around and they want to run.
Wow,
they want
no
to compete,
kidding.
That was super cool. But Bryce Canyon, Utah was beautiful. California, up Palm Desert was beautiful.
Which one was the hardest?
The hardest was easily Wyoming. Wyoming was an out and back, so it was 6.5 out, 6.5 back.
Oh, yeah.
First 4 miles straight downhill, about 2,500 feet.
Oh, no.
So you had to finish with that.
Oh, no.
And then 2.5
Like,
miles.
why didn't they do this
uphill.
in reverse?
Yeah. So it was, normally my time is about an hour and 50 minutes. And
That's pretty good.
2:10, 2:15.
Wow.
And the winners are usually like 1:10. The winner was an hour and a half. So it was awful course.
Yeah, it
Tough.
sounds brutal.
Tough.
I've only done that one time.
Yeah.
Actually, the same year you got involved with Developers Collaborative, 2007, I ran a half marathon in Maine.
Nice.
And that sucked.
Which one? The Maine Marathon?
The Maine one, yeah.
Yeah. I did that in 08.
I was
first
getting
time.
right to the finish, close to the end, and some guy comes out, and I thought it was water, but it was a Solo cup filled with beer.
Oh, yeah.
And I grabbed it, and I was like, oh, my God, this is the worst.
There's this race in Millinocket. I don't know if you've heard about it. It's a free race. It's up in December, and they have shots of Fireball at all the rest stops.
Oh, really?
They also have raw oysters on the half shell at mile 5, which is awesome, which I do partake.
Yeah.
But it's a funny running's a funny culture. It's
Yeah.
a little subculture, and I still run them. I ran one at Lake Mead, Nevada, few weeks ago, and I've already, I think I have 10 states on the second round. Not that I'm definitely going to do a second round, but I'm still kind of running them. I like running them. It's fun.
Yeah.
So
Yes, Hawaii, that must have been an interesting one. And
Hawaii was
Alaska.
good. Yeah, I did those both the same year. I actually did Alaska on a back-to-back. I did Mount Rainier on Saturday, and then I flew up to Anchorage and ran Anchorage on Sunday.
Jeez, man.
And that was it wasn't the most scenic Alaska race you could probably run, but they told you what to do if there was a bear, and there wasn't a bear, but there could have been a bear.
Just outrun the other guy.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. Yep.
Well, this has been a pretty interesting conversation, and I think one thing that I would like to wrap up with, Kevin, there's a lot of people that listen to this who might be considering doing development.
Mm-hmm.
Do you have any advice for people that are considering getting into doing a development project? And
Yeah, I part of my role is when I get those phone calls is to always sit down with people and help them and talk to them. And like I said, there's many ways into development. They aren't usually going to developer school or saying I want to be a developer when I grow up. But I think for most people, the answer is start small, buy a 2-unit, buy a 3-unit, live in the bottom floor, redevelop it, learn how to pay the bills on time, learn how to do a small loan with a bank, even if it's a 30-year fixed for a small thing, and develop some skills. Don't listen to this podcast and say I'm going to do a 40-unit LIHTC deal and I'm going to bring in all the capital, and it isn't realistic.
Mm-hmm.
But figure out. I liken it to the nature documentaries where David Attenborough's narrating, and there's birds and there's monkeys and there's all these different animals, and they're all trying to get the termite out of the tree. And they all have a different way to do it. One of them's got the really long fingernails that have evolved, and some of them got the beak, and some of them got the claws, but they all have this perfectly adapted evolutionary means to achieve the end. And development is like that. You got to figure out what you do that's a little bit better than everybody else. You have your niche and how you figured out how to do it. And a lot of it is growing where you're planted and leveraging relationships. But a lot of it is saying, what am I seeing? What's coming across my view? And what am I just a little bit better at than the next guy? And leverage that and lean into that. And for me, it's been, there are developers out there that are a lot better with seizing opportunity than I am, and taking big risks and taking big swings and making big globs of money from taking big, brave bets. I'm not as good at that as them. What I'm better at, probably than them, is coming up with bulletproof financial models that are not recession-proof, but recession-resistant, and really building strong hybrid financial structures that are going to be singles and doubles for a high average and help people. And I'll go up against anyone in that space. And for me to try to be, what I'm not, I might be able to have some success at it, but going back to being a new developer, figure out what you're good at. If you're really good with your hands and you understand construction and you know how to fix things, you need to get a fixer-upper, and you just kind of build it from there. Build it around you. Don't try to be somebody you're not. Build it around the talents you have. Like you said, Maine's a small community. We all want to help each other. I mean, anybody will take your phone call in Maine. It's not just me. Someone called you up and said, I want to learn about X. I know you'd meet with them.
Yeah.
You wouldn't be like, I can't meet with you. I'm too busy. I'm too important.
Right.
People don't. Some people do that here. Most people don't.
Right. Yeah, it's one of the wonderful things. Just before having you here today, there's a young man, Ahmed, who used to work for us, but he's a Syrian refugee. You talk about how we kind of win the lottery, if you will, by being born a white dude in America today, which is true.
Yeah.
I mean, he's overcome so much adversity to come to this country, and our paths crossed through something called Jobs for Maine's Graduates, where he came and interned with us. And at 19, he ended up buying his first house.
I remember that story. I don't know if I saw it on, you told me about it or something, but.
Yeah, I mean, just a great young man, it's working really hard, but to your point, like just trying to do something, take some initiative and take some action. I think that we meaning those who have the access to resources and the ability to do so, kind of owe to society almost kind of this moral obligation to create housing and be a part of development, even though it's not like a moniker bestowed at most post-secondary schools in the United States or anything like that. It's not really a degree that people go for, but if you understand that, this is what I need to do to make this space available, then maybe you ought to be going and doing it,
Well, you never really escape the selfish aspect either, because the secret is it kind of feels really good to do it.
Yeah.
It's like philanthropy. Richard was a big philanthropist, and I don't think my family ever donated any money to anything, because it's like when you're in that sort of lower middle class-ish kind of thing, it's not a thing.
Right.
And
You got bills to pay.
He's like, oh, I give money away. Kevin, you got to give a little bit of money away. I'm like, are you crazy? And he's like, no, just give him $100. And so I do that. And what I know now from being philanthropic and giving larger gifts is the secret. You could say, Kevin, you're such a wonderful man for giving away this money. Yeah, it kind of feels pretty good. And it making money and being successful yourself feels really good too, but it only feels so good.
Right.
But, helping that guy you helped feels probably better than, your 45th sale of the year.
Oh, totally. Yeah.
So there's a selfish aspect to it too, that it feels really fulfilling, and it's the right thing to do. So what the hell?
Yeah, I mean, you're absolutely right. And, you look at what we kind of just take for granted a lot of times in this country, and what other people literally fight tooth and nail to have access to. And, our problems really kind of get pretty minuscule in the grand scheme of things.
Luxury
pretty fast.
problems. We've all got luxury problems here. Yeah.
Well, I appreciate you sharing your insight with us today, Kevin. And it's always fun learning more about what you have going on. If there's a place that folks could go to learn more about what Developers Collaborative has going on, where would that be?
The easiest place is our social media, which is more robust than it used to be. We're on Facebook, we're on Instagram. We're not really on Twitter, but you can Google us. You can go on our website and see what we do, and there's also quite a few news articles about us. If and you can kind of get a good sense of what we're up to. And we have of course, contact forms you can reach out to us on social media. You can also fill out a form on our website. And, we're not hard to find.
Yeah.
We're around.
One last thing, any big projects on the horizon that you're excited about?
There's the ones you can talk about and the ones you can't. I think I can talk about this one. I hope I can. I'll talk about it. And if I get in trouble, so be it. But we're hoping to break ground this summer on a project with Bath Iron Works, in conjunction with Bath Iron Works, which is 84 units of housing for their workforce.
Yeah.
And it's a pretty interesting public-private partnership between General Dynamics and the Navy and us and the city of Bath. And that's exciting, because that's we've nibbled around this employer-assisted housing model for many, many years. We kind of did one with Maine Med a long time ago, with their medical students and recent graduates. But a lot of times the workforce housing conversation begins with the employer calls us, we come in, say, you're Developers Collaborative, you can create anything. Tell us how to do, these great apartment units or houses for our workers that are making $50,000 to $70,000 a year. And we come back and we say, well, here's the math, here's what debt that drives, and here's the gap, and who's going to fill the gap? Well, we don't have any money, and they kind of think we're going to be able to do something that the market can't do, and we can optimize, but we can't create subsidy for them, and usually the employers don't want to step up, and in this case, the employer did want to step up and allow the project to go forward. So it really was a model we've been trying to break into for a long time with limited success, and this feels like hopefully it's a win, knock on wood. Don't want to jinx it. But
right. So this is a situation where an employer is coming to the table and saying, hey, we want to secure those units for our employees because they're struggling to find a place to live, and we can't retain these people unless they have a place to live.
Yeah, exactly. Yep.
It's interesting because that's how Rumford got originally built. The guy came and built a mill, right? And then was like, oh, crap, I need a place for people to live.
A lot of places like that, a lot of company towns.
And they went and built the housing for the people that live there, but that doesn't happen anymore.
Yeah.
I'm glad you brought this project up. I want to talk a little bit more about it because it's interesting. BIW, one of the state's largest employers, defense contractor, very successful. still struggling to hire and retain people because of housing. And it's among all the chambers of commerce seems to be the number one issue that they're focusing on, that, you know, in terms of policy and so forth, because their members are telling them, look, we can't hire people because they don't have a place to live. But historically, they, meaning the employers, haven't really stepped up to give any kind of financial security to a developer to actually get it built. Are they doing it that way, or are they just leasing the units from you when they're done at a rate that supports the build out?
Doing it the former. There's no master lease involved at all.
So you theoretically could get this all built and then just rent it to whoever you want?
No. We have a development agreement with them that stipulates that we will rent to their employees and we'll only be filling units with non-employees if there's no employees to take the unit. Because as you know, from bank perspective, we have to be able to fill that unit. We can't just keep it empty.
Right.
But no, they have first call, but they don't have we're not contemplating a master lease right now.
Do you think that would be a way to get more stuff built? Like if nonprofits, organizations that aren't interested in running buildings but would sign master leases, or that's just not going to happen? That's
the gold standard because you can, if they're bankable and they have good credit, you know, as you know, you take that to the bank and you get your financing.
Yeah.
There's multiple ways to do it. The way we're doing is a little bit of a blend, but the other way they could do it is they could give their employees essentially vouchers to, you know, increment, to add to, if the market, you know, if we can produce units that need $2,300 a month to clear, and they can afford, according to their income, $1,600, well, an $800 voucher accomplishes the same thing as X million dollars in the capital stack.
Versus giving a $10,000 bonus at the end of the year or something.
Or a subsidy to the developer to build the unit for less debt, for less equity.
Yeah, that's interesting. I'm really excited about this project because I think it's going to be a catalyst for other employers around the state who have kind of been playing a more wait and see what happens approach to be more active in getting housing created.
Yeah, I think it's a challenge whenever you're innovating to come up with something that's not a one-off and that's replicable.
Yeah.
And so there's some elements of this, some thinking about this that's replicable, but at the end of the day, you had the Navy willing to be involved with some funds that helps, you know, and not everybody has the Navy.
Right.
You know? But
no, it's true.
You know, we've looked at it for a lot of other employers, and some of them have then taken sometimes we do little consulting gigs, you know, 10, 20,000, we'll do a report for you. Some employers have taken that and been able to do some things, and some have just said, we don't have the capital for this right now, or the organizational priorities have shifted. But this one feels like it's going to get over the finish line, but nothing's done in real estate till it's done.
That's awesome,
you know?
because we talk about creating workforce housing all the time, and generally that is like just, you know, LIHTC deals that are subsidized and allow for people to maybe do up to a higher AMI, area median income, you know, income that they have, but still it falls short. I mean, the only way it's going to close this gap is with the employers, I think, stepping up and saying, hey, in order for us to recruit and retain people, we need to have some assurance. One thing, I'm curious your thoughts on this. Now we're just kind of having a conversation about this. The University of Maine system has like 13,000 acres of land. I know we've in the past approached them about student housing in Augusta, and it didn't go anywhere. Not
we had
because of you.
Four presidents we had to deal with in
over
year.
time. But bigger picture, like, should the university be using its land to essentially create housing for people at a lower cost because there was no cost for the land?
In theory, that's helpful, but you got to remember that land is one input of development, and this is the same thing, LD 2003, the same thing. Any relaxed zoning and all these reforms people talk about are super helpful and super good, and we need them. But at the end of the day, all they do is reduce the cost of land.
Yeah.
And if land is 10% of your budget, maybe, you know, but if your construction hard cost starts with a 3, and your interest rate starts with a 7, and your rent per month starts with a 1, you can have all the free land you want. You know, you have to be more creative than that.
Yeah.
So.
Not going to get there.
Not on its own, but if, say, a university needs housing and they want to put in land, that's a piece of the puzzle. Like one of the things we were talking about when we were trying to do the UMA deal was Can you plow the snow? Can we get our natural gas, our oil cheaper, our electricity in bulk because we're purchasing it with you? Can you do things that will allow us to pass on the savings to the students? You know, and it's all those creative ideas. It's not going to be like people talk a lot about TIFs and if I could just have a TIF. TIF comes out if you capitalize it. What is it? 2% of your capital stack. It's not a TIF alone. If a TIF alone makes your project feasible, and it's not because you needed the points for a LIHTC app, it was so close already, you probably could have figured it out with some VE, you know? But it's a TIF, it's free land, it's, you know, a little bit of savings on operations, it's efficient construction, it's smaller units, and maybe a little bit of more financial help. It's all those things to try to just get the thing to connect.
Yeah, and I mean, just the overall cost of things. I remember when you were first getting going in this arena and I was first kind of getting started in the legislature. And I remember a conversation with you like, Kevin, this is insane. I can't believe that you're spending $175,000 to build a unit of housing. And now that would be a dream.
Yeah. Bruce Poliquin was, you know, he was like Khrushchev banging his shoe at the United Nations. He was complaining about the cost of housing then. And it was just like, inflation's crazy. It's gone to the buildings we build now for $310 a foot, we used to build for $120 a foot.
Yeah.
Same exact building.
Yeah.
Same quality.
Yeah.
So
yeah,
it's nuts.
Yeah, definitely. Well, hey, thanks, Kevin, for your time today. And anything else you want people to know before we wrap up?
Oh, I don't know. This is good. You know, it's probably a lot I could want people to know, but they might not want to hear it.